Another illegal betting scandal has hit the professional sports world, this time Major League Baseball. Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase, two pitchers for the Cleveland Guardians, were slapped with federal charges including wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy after an indictment accused the two of betraying America's pastime. Prosecutors allege the players conspired with bettors and in exchange for kickbacks, rigged certain pitches to help them win prop bets. The indictment was announced by the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. This is the same office that is handling the two separate gambling scandals involving an NBA coach, past and present players, and the mafia that rocked the basketball world in October. Shaneeda Jaffer, a partner at Benesch Law, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, one of the hosts of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is Shaneeda Jaffer, a partner at Benesch Law. Shaneeda, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
The MLB is the latest league to see its own players embroiled in the string of illegal gambling controversies rattling professional sports. Two major league pitchers were accused of scheming with bettors to rig pitches in exchange for bribes and kickbacks. And the indictment says this in part. The defendants defrauded betting platforms, deprived Major League Baseball and the Cleveland Guardians of their honest services, illegally enriched themselves and their co-conspirators, misled the public, and betrayed America's pastime. What's your reaction to this latest gambling case that's rocking professional sports?
Well, yeah, it's another example of the Department of Justice taking betting in sports very seriously. We saw the indictments that came out in the NBA betting scandal recently. This is just another shot across the bow, I would say. The Department of Justice is very, very focused on professional athletes and their involvement in these betting rings. You know, the advent of sports betting and the legalization of sports betting, particularly these in-game prop bets, really make it easy and make the system vulnerable to this kind of behavior. And the government is very clearly interested in pursuing charges like this.
I do want to talk about prop bets because they were defined in the indictment, and I want to talk about what these pitchers allegedly did according to prosecutors. According to prosecutors, the scheme was that they tipped the bettors off on the type of pitches they were throwing as well as the speed of the pitch, and then the bets were rigged. Those bets were prop bets, and they were described in the indictment as this, quote, bets placed on an individual player's performance during a game rather than on the final outcome of the game. Does that make a difference here because the pitchers allegedly were rigging a pitch and not saying, hey, we're going to throw an entire game? Because of that, do you think there's more leniency?
I'm doubtful that there would necessarily be leniency just because the outcome of the game wasn't affected. The real issue here is whether or not these individuals were conspiring with bettors to change the outcome of certain aspects of the game, right? Baseball is uniquely, I would say, uniquely vulnerable to this type of prop bet because there are so many things in the game of baseball that can be controlled by an individual player, like pitching, as you just described, right? If there's you choose to throw a ball instead of a strike, or you choose to throw the pitch into the dirt. If somebody you know on the other side is betting that you will do that, that's a really very straightforward way to win a bet. If these allegations are true, I wouldn't expect that there would be leniency in this case just because it didn't necessarily affect the outcome of the game. In fact, I think in one of the cases that were highlighted in the indictment, the Guardians actually won the game, wherein the pitcher was allegedly conspiring with bettors to throw certain pitches.
I do want to talk about the specific charges here. The two Guardians players, Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase, are charged with wire fraud conspiracy, honest services wire fraud conspiracy, conspiracy to influence sporting contests by bribery, and money laundering conspiracy. How serious are these charges?
The charges are very serious, Brittany. The government has charged these, the Department of Justice has charged these crimes as conspiracies, which means that they are not only the crime itself, the action that these individuals allegedly took, but the agreement to do it, as a group. And the penalties for that kind of crime and those kinds of conspiracy can be quite steep. The way that the sentencing guidelines work in sentencing in federal crimes is often based on how much money is at stake. And because there is quite large sums of money at stake in this case, I believe the indictment alleges more than $400,000 of potential ill-gotten winnings. That can create significant exposure for the individuals involved in the conspiracy as far as a period of incarceration might be concerned.
And prosecutors allege that Clase threw balls to rig prop bets starting in or around May of 2023, and he helped the bettors win at least $400,000. And Ortiz allegedly joined this scheme beginning on or around June of 2025, and he helped the bettors win at least $60,000. So one alleges a lot more than the other. There was a lot more time than the other. Does the length of time or the amount of money won become a factor here, do you think?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It may not be a factor in whether or not the individuals are, guilty or are going to be found guilty of the actual crimes alleged, but it absolutely will affect the penalty that the individuals would receive. Because again, it is tied to the amount of money at stake. Although, again, because it is charged as a conspiracy, each individual is effectively can be made responsible for the actions of their co-conspirators. So in that way, they're kind of all in it together. But the fact that I believe it's Mr. Ortiz who allegedly joined the conspiracy much later, he would be considered to have less of a role, likely because he wasn't, as far as the indictment goes, it doesn't appear that they believe he was the sort of the mastermind, if you will, of this conspiracy.
And the office that's prosecuting this case is the Eastern District of New York. And this is the same office that is involved in the NBA scandals, the two NBA scandals that involve the mafia, a coach, former and current players. And when I was talking to another attorney on the NBA scandal, this is what she said. Generally speaking, when the Eastern District of New York brings an indictment, they've got the goods, they've got the evidence, and they feel very confident that they can prove these charges. Do you agree with that? And what do you think the strongest evidence here is? Do you think it's those text messages and gifts because they're in writing? Or was it the obvious video because the balls were thrown literally into the dirt? Or do you think it's that money trail?
Well, to answer your first question first, Brittany, I do believe that Eastern District of New York is an excellent prosecutorial office. They do bring really interesting and well structured cases. That said, the indictment is just the prosecutor's version of the facts, and it's not the whole story. As a defense attorney, I can see certain areas in this indictment that would be potential weaknesses in the prosecution's case. And I believe that Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Clase will have attorneys that will be able to exploit those weaknesses. There are some defenses here. But to answer your second question, what is the most devastating evidence? Context really matters in a case like this. When you read the indictment, the text messages sound bad. The timing of when the text messages versus when the pitch happened versus when the bets were made, I agree, it looks bad. But again, context matters. It's important to get the whole picture. You don't know what the rest of that text message conversation was just by reading the indictment. And perhaps there is a more innocent explanation for some of those messages. It's also possible that some of the timing that looks pretty damning in the indictment could be coincidental or could be explained in some other manner. So again, the indictment's just kind of the version of the facts that the prosecutor's office wants us all to see and is going to paint the strongest picture of their version of the story. There is a whole nother story here that we will probably learn about as the case progresses from the defense team.
And of course, on the flip side, as a defense attorney, what do you think are the biggest weaknesses here when you're listening to what the prosecutors say, as well as reading the indictment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the context is where the devil is going to be in the details in this case. What were these individuals speaking about? What were the totality of their text messages? What else was going on? Were these individuals placing multiple bets and on multiple players at the same time? Is there an innocent explanation for some of these bets and some of these pitches? And the other thing, of course, is that, while Major League Baseball pitchers are incredibly accurate and have an enormous amount of control over their pitches, they do make mistakes from time to time, right? They do intend to throw a strike, but ends up being a ball, and sometimes they accidentally throw it into the dirt. And so, I think as a defense lawyer, I think I would really be interested to dig very deep into the discovery that I would get from the Department of Justice, and really look at what the context is and what are these individuals talking about, what is their relationship, and really following the money trail, because the money trail is often how these cases are made or broken. And the money trail, if you read the indictment, looks pretty clear. But again, there are often other explanations for some of those transactions. And as a defense lawyer, the devil's really in the details, and you got to really understand all of the details of what's happening because the prosecution's burden is to prove these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's a pretty tall burden.
And law enforcement's language here is pretty strong. I want to read some quotes from them. The FBI assistant director in charge said that the alleged actions by the pitchers, quote, sullied the reputation of America's pastime. And Joseph Nocella, the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York, said this: integrity, honesty, and fair play are part of the DNA of professional sports. When corruption infiltrates the sport, it brings disgrace not only to the participants, but damages the public trust in an institution that is vital and dear to all of us. Today's charges make clear that our office will continue to vigorously prosecute those who corrupt sports through illegal means. I mean, sullying the reputation of America's pastime, that's a pretty strong charge there. Does this indicate to you that they are really planning to throw the book at these players?
Yeah, I would think so, Brittany. I mean, I think they're making a real example out of Mr. Clase and Mr. Ortiz, just as they did previously with the NBA indictment. I think what the Department of Justice is saying loud and clear to professional athletes is do not get close to this line. Don't cross the line, but don't even get close to it because we are watching you. And I think that these indictments are sort of the first wave or the front line of this type of work because you know this office. Now, it's clear that this office has prosecutors that are dedicated to this issue. They're working on this issue probably exclusively. And if you're a professional athlete in the United States right now, you got to be very careful about the conversations you're having with your friends, about whether your friends and the people you grew up with or people you're really close to are betting on your games. I mean, the microscope is on professional sports. The DOJ is looking, and all professional athletes and their friends and family members who might be betting on games ought to be very, very careful going forward.
And as you and I have talked about in this conversation, this is not the first major sports betting case we're seeing in recent weeks. There are two separate illegal gambling schemes involving the NBA that have involved a coach, current and past players, as well as the mafia, and the details there are really straight out of a movie. One of the cases was characterized as the insider trading saga for the NBA, and another was a nationwide scheme to rig illegal poker games that involved things like an X-ray table, as well as certain contact lenses that could see the cards. I mean, is this showing you, clearly it is, that there's a crackdown on sports betting, but what type of precedent do you think that this is really setting?
They're being aggressive. They're definitely being aggressive. They're definitely trying to send the message that they're watching and that they're not going to give anyone a pass. I will say this indictment, the Cleveland Guardians indictment involving Mr. Clase and Mr. Ortiz, it's not nearly as sophisticated or as, movie-like as the NBA, the ones you just talked about, right? These appear to be individuals, who are, I believe, nationals of the citizens of the Dominican Republic who are making prop bets, in-game prop bets. And it doesn't appear to be a wide-ranging conspiracy or a conspiracy that involves, organized crime or sophisticated technology. So I think maybe the message that I'm getting, at least from the Department of Justice in these cases, is that it doesn't matter how big or how small. It doesn't matter if you have, organized crime or cartels involved in your operation, your illegal betting operation, or if it's just you and someone you might have grown up with, sharing information about bets. They're laser focused on corruption in sports. And it's true, right? It's true that the American public deserves to be able to trust that the games that they're watching are fair and not, corrupted. So many of the people in this country get our joy and our relaxation from watching sports. And we want to believe that when we're watching sports, we're watching a fair game. We want to cheer for our team, and we want to, celebrate the wins and mourn the losses of our team with our friends and our family and our communities. And if we feel like that is not real, what we're watching is fixed or there's corruption, it takes away from the joy of the game. And it really does affect, sort of all of us. And all of the Cleveland Guardians fans right now are probably feeling sad and wondering whether or not the players that they were rooting for were being honest with them. And again, we don't know. These are just allegations, and it could be that these individuals did not do the things that the government is accusing them of doing. But if they did, it's a sad day for baseball. Absolutely.
And you did bring up a really interesting point about the players. Both are citizens of the Dominican Republic. Ortiz was arrested in Boston, but Clase is not in U.S. custody. Does their citizenship here play a role at all?
Yeah, I think it can. I think it changes the analysis, perhaps when you're as a criminal defendant, a defendant in a criminal case, when you're talking about your options with your defense attorney. I know as a defense attorney that when I have a client who's not a US citizen, the metrics change. The things that you have to consider change, right? Because you may have a life and a family here in the United States, and being able to remain in the United States may be more important to you than anything else. And that may not be a possibility if you are convicted of a crime. And so I think it changes quite a bit. It also gives the government more levers, more pressure that they can put on people, right? Because not only is there a potential criminal sentence or a criminal penalty, which may include a sentence of incarceration, there's also potential deportation. The possibility that you can't come back to this country, because of your citizenship status. So it absolutely affects the way that these individuals are thinking about their case and the way that the United States government is thinking about their case.
And so, like we've been saying in this conversation, another bombshell in professional sports. What specifically are you looking out for next?
I'm looking to see whether Mr. Clase is found somewhere in the United States and is arrested, or is what the status of that defendant is. Also looking to see whether there's any additional information released by the defense team here, and whether these cases are going to go to trial, or if there's going to be some kind of a plea agreement leading up to trial. I think the evidence that we can see in the indictment appears to be quite, they have quite a bit of evidence. They have phone records, they have bank records, they clearly have cooperating witnesses, and they have, evidence from video footage of what actually happened in these games. And of course, they have the timing of all the bets that were placed on these various prop bets. So I'll be interested to hear whether the defense team has a narrative that they put forward about what their explanation is. I know that Mr. Ortiz's attorney has come out with some very strong language about his client's innocence. And so it'll be interesting to me to see how that evidence comes out, whether at trial or before trial.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for, and I appreciate your legal expertise here in breaking it down. Shaneeda Jaffer, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Brittany. It was lovely to be here.